If you are a longtime listener to me or a longtime reader going back to when I was at Red State, back starting in 2004, I have never in my life, going back to my start in politics in the 90s when I was in college, have never opposed a government shutdown. I am an ardent defender of government shutdowns for one reason and one reason, well, not the only reason, but the primary reason. When the government shuts down, you and I are safe. My buddy Chip Roy, congressman from Texas, was asked yesterday, well, what happens if a hurricane rolls through Texas when the government shut down? What are you going to do? He says, what do you mean? When my great-grandfather was a Texas marshal and a hurricane rolled through, he didn't think, oh my gosh, I need direction from Washington on how to take care of myself. I mean, part of the problem with the government and why I like it shut down is because it reminds people that the world does not come to an end. Government shutdowns are good things because people have to take care of themselves. They can't rely on Uncle Sam's man boob to take care of them. They got to find another teat to suckle. They got to get on with their life. They got to grow up. They got to take care of themselves instead of being dependent on the government for everything. Government shutdowns are good. But every government shutdown has also had a plan by conservatives, sometimes successful, many times not, but sometimes successful. Worth it. Republican conservatives led by Freedom Caucus members during the Obama administration got sequestration. Sequestration was a real cut to government, not a cut in future growth, but an actual cut at the current government. It was a real and good cut in the size of government. It saved the U.S. budget. They don't always get what they want, like the government shutdown to force the end of Obamacare. Didn't get what it wanted, but it was a worthy fight. We were gonna stay there until Obama yielded on Obamacare, and he didn't. And Republicans in the Senate ultimately sold out House Republicans, but it was a worthy fight. Right now, House Freedom Caucus members have been able to get their House Republican brethren, moderates, progressive, liberals, conservatives, real conservatives, all to go along with an 8% cut in government outside of Defense and Veterans Affairs. That would be the starting negotiating point for House Republicans, would be an 8% cut. They might not be able to get an 8% cut. In fact, they wouldn't get an 8% cut. But their starting position was going to be, we want 8% cut to the size and scope of government outside of Defense and Veterans Affairs. That would be their opening position. And if they start at 8%, maybe they get 1%, but they still get a cut in the size and scope of government. You start with your negotiation being we want 8%, then suddenly you're arguing over what's our cut going to be, not how much bigger are we going to grow government, because they're on record saying absolutely not. We will not grow government. What a continuing resolution tends to do is it says, okay, we're going to continue the government. We're going to add 1% or 2% to the growth to keep up with inflation. And the House Republicans, their starting position would be 8% cut. They wouldn't get it. So the change in position would be, okay, no cuts, but no growth either. This is zero. The continuing resolution is going to be exactly what it's been. We will not have any new cuts, or we will not have any new spending. At least you wouldn't be growing government. But a half dozen populists, they're not even really conservatives, they're populists. They seem to just want to shut down the government. Now, again, if you want to just shut down the government, but what are you going to get out of it? The government's eventually going to be open. You're not going to shut it down permanently. I wish you could, but you're not going to. So what are you hoping to get? And that's the problem. Every government shutdown we've ever had, you knew what they wanted. Even if they couldn't get it, you knew what they wanted. And now it seems like this is to get rid of Kevin McCarthy from Matt Gaetz, but not from everybody else. For him, it's about Kevin McCarthy. For the others, it's about different things for each one of them. They just want to shut the government down, but they have no master plan to get anything. They have no way to build a coalition. So here is what's going to happen, and this is my concern. The moderate Republicans will work with the Democrats in the House, and the moderate Republicans and the Democrats will hatch a plan that grows the government. The starting point had been an 8% cut. The House Freedom Caucus was able to get the moderate Republicans and the liberal Republicans, got all of them to agree. Our negotiating position to start the negotiations with the Senate would be an 8% cut. And along come this half dozen group of people who said, nope, we're not going to vote for the continuing resolution. Okay. I'm fine with shutting down the government. But we need to understand where this heads, and that is to the growth of government. Ukraine will be funded. The moderate Republicans support funding Ukraine. The Democrats do as well. So they will cut a deal that undermines the conservatives. Under the rules of the House, if 218 members agree, they can bring something to the floor. So if the House conservative populace half dozen dig in their heels and cause the government to shut down, then you have all the Democrats and a handful of Republicans get together. They come up with their own plan. They even cut McCarthy out of the process. They grow the government. They fund Ukraine. They don't fund the border. And it's an acceptable deal to a majority of the Senate. I mean, that's my problem here. I want to be on the side of shutting down the government. Shutting down the government is a good thing. But I can see what's going to happen. You have a majority of the Republicans in the House, a majority of the House Freedom Caucus supports cutting government by 8%. And 6 Republicans just want to shut down the government for the sake of shutting down the government. That's going to push the moderates to the side of the Democrats. And not only is the government going to open back up, but it's going to grow. If you want to shut down the government, you need a plan. Every time conservatives have orchestrated a shutdown of the government, they've had a plan. Hasn't always worked out for them. But occasionally it's gotten them something like sequestration. The Senate Republicans want a clean resolution. What is a clean resolution? That means no strings attached. They're going to take exactly what they came up with the last continuing resolution. They're going to pass it again, add a percentage here or there to grow government, and pass it. That's what the Senate Republicans want. The House conservatives who want to shut it down have not even built a coalition of conservative senators to help them. They're just freelancing, doing it. They don't have a plan. This is what bothers me about this shutdown, is that this seems to be a grift. Matt Gaetz wants to sabotage Kevin McCarthy. I don't like Kevin McCarthy. What's so funny is a lot of you who are listening were mad at me in January of last year, or no, January of this year, when I was opposed to Kevin McCarthy. It's so funny that so many of the people who were mad at me for opposing Kevin McCarthy are now mad at me for not wanting to go along with Matt Gaetz to get rid of Kevin McCarthy. I'm perfectly fine getting rid of Kevin McCarthy. Just what's the rest of the plan? Are we going to get rid of McCarthy and then reopen the government and grow the government? Because that's what the Democrats want. That's what the moderates want. I want to gut the government. I want a government small enough I can drown it in a teacup. And all I can see that this plan for a shutdown is going to give me is a bigger government when it reopens. The House Republican starting position for negotiations with the Senate was 8% cut. So the worst case scenario would be status quo. And that's not good. It's too much, but it's better than growing government. The House position was an 8% across the board cut, except for defense and Veterans Affairs. And that wasn't good enough for Matt Gaetz. It wasn't good enough for some of the others. Now, some of them always historically vote against continuing resolutions. God bless them. I admire their principle. And if I were there, I'd be with them. Say, nope, you got to get votes from someone else. I'm not voting for a continuing resolution. And that's fine. But Matt Gaetz has voted for continuing resolutions. In fact, most of the half dozen who are saying they're going to shut down the government have voted for continuing resolutions that have grown government. With Gaetz, it seems personal to McCarthy. And that's fine. I don't like McCarthy. But I don't like the government either. And when your starting negotiation was 8% cuts and you wind up shutting down the government and it comes back and instead you've got a 3% increase in government. We can't afford a 3% increase in government. We can't afford a 1% increase in government. So what's your plan? That's the problem. What's the plan? There's no articulated plan on how to keep the government from growing once the shutdown is over. There's no articulated plan to offer House Republican moderates to keep them from skipping out to the Democrats. The House Republican moderates were on record supporting an 8% cut. They were willing to go along with that, and it got scrapped by these 6 people. If we're going to shut down the government, keep it shut down. The problem is we're not going to keep it shut down. You know it, and I know it. The moderates will work with the Democrats, and they'll reopen it. And the Democrats want growth of government, not of the economy, not of your livelihood. They want growth of government. They want to put you on the social safety net and let the government fund your life. The moderates, they don't want to shut down the government. They were willing to do an 8% cut. But the moderates will be willing to grow the government if that's how they get the government back up, and they think the government's a good thing. They think the government needs to be around. I don't. So what's the plan, populists? What's the plan? It's like the guy in Georgia, Colton Moore, who wants to call a special session of the legislature to impeach Fani Willis. Everybody's told him no. He's been booted from the Republican caucus in the Senate. He doesn't actually have a plan. He's got a grift. He's fundraising off of this. He doesn't have the votes. Even if all the Republicans agreed to do it, they don't have the votes to stop the DA. They need a 2/3 vote of both houses in the Georgia legislature. He hadn't bothered to point that out to any of the people sending him money. There's no plan there. It's just a grift. And that's what I feel like is happening here. You know, I'm willing to die on the ramparts of government shutdown. I am willing to die on the ramparts for the conservative cause. But my willingness to die on the ramparts has been tempered by the fact that so many of these people are clowns. They're like the Washington Generals. The Washington Generals are that exhibition-based basketball team that always loses to the Harlem Globetrotters. You know at every single game that the Washington Generals are the bad guys who are going to lose. I'm willing to stand on the ramparts, and I'm willing to fight for a government shutdown, but I got a sneaking suspicion we don't actually have some sort of master plan to get anything accomplished. It's just a shutdown for the sake of a shutdown that ultimately will reopen the government, and it'll be bigger. And I just don't want to go through a shutdown fight when there's actually not a plan in place to fight for anything other than letting the moderates hop over to the Democrats and grow government when it reopens. That's not a plan any of us should get behind. We've got to stop the growth of government. And this plan by Matt Gaetz and the populists seems just to be a plan of spite against McCarthy, not a plan to actually be spiteful of the size and scope of government.